Chapter 1. The Descent into the Beige Labyrinth. The air, even at the top of the stairwell, carried a peculiar scent. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly. It was a dry, almost sterile aroma, tinged with the faintest hint of ozone and something else. Something akin to warmed plastic, perhaps, or the subtle exhalation of countless vacuum tubes that had long since gone cold. This was the scent of the basement, the subterranean heart of the East Wing Annex, where the titans of computation resided. Our narrator, a man whose voice was as worn and comforting as an old tweed jacket, cleared his throat softly. Ah, yes, the basement. It wasn't a place one simply stumbled into. Oh, no, one descended. A deliberate act, really, a pilgrimage, in its own quiet way. The stairs themselves were a testament to utility over aesthetics. Solid concrete, worn smooth by the passage of countless sensible shoes and the occasional wheeled cart laden with punch cards. Each step echoed with a certain finality, a gentle announcement of your departure from the sunlit world above and your entry into a realm of perpetual twilight, illuminated by the steady, unwavering glow of indicator lights. He paused, letting the image settle. The lighting down there was functional. Fluorescent tubes, humming with a consistent, almost soporific pitch, cast a pale, even glow across the linoleum floor. No dramatic shadows, no harsh contrasts. Just a pervasive, soft luminescence that seemed to absorb all urgency. And then, as you rounded the final corner, there it was. Not a sudden revelation, mind you, but a gradual immersion. The sound. That was the first true sign. A low, resonant hum, a deep, steady thrum that vibrated not just in the air, but in the very soles of your feet. It was the sound of the machines, he continued, his voice lowering further. The mainframe computers, not sleek silver monoliths of science fiction. Oh no. These were more substantial, more real, encased in vast, beige cabinets, stretching in orderly rows like patient sentinels. Beige. That was the dominant hue. Beige cabinets, beige panels, even the rubber mats on the floor seemed to possess a certain muted beige quality. It was a color that whispered of endurance, of quiet purpose, a color that didn't demand attention, but simply was. And within these beige fortresses resided the brains of the operation, the real workhorses. Think of it, he mused, a space designed not for human comfort, but for machine efficiency. The air, pumped and filtered, was kept consistently cool, a deliberate act to prevent the tireless processors from overheating. This constant, cool airflow contributed to that distinctive scent, that subtle whisper of the technological sublime. And the sound, that gentle, persistent hum. It was the lullaby of the digital age, played on an orchestra of fans and whirring magnetic tape drives. On this particular evening, he said, a subtle shift in his tone suggesting the beginning of a specific narrative thread. The basement felt particularly alive with its own quiet energy. The outside world, with its rustling leaves and distant traffic, was a forgotten memory. Down here, time seemed to slow, measured not by the ticking of clocks, but by the rhythmic blinking of lights on control panels and the ceaseless, comforting drone of the cooling systems. He allowed a soft chuckle to escape. It was a world unto itself. A serene sanctuary of logic and electricity, patiently waiting for the next set of instructions, the next reel of data to be threaded onto its waiting arms. Chapter 2. The Architects of the Hum. The engineers who inhabited this subterranean world were a curious breed. They weren't the flashy, tie-loosening types you might find in the upper floors, rushing between meetings and coffee breaks. No, these were men, and a few pioneering women, of a different temperament. Their focus was singular, their patience seemingly infinite, their understanding of these behemoth machines bordering on the intuitive. They moved with a certain quietude, the narrator explained, his voice a gentle murmur. Their footsteps were soft on the linoleum, their voices hushed, as if not to disturb the sleeping giants around them. They spoke in a language of their own, a blend of technical jargon and understated affection for the machines they tended. "She's running a bit warm tonight," one might say, not with alarm, but with a concerned, almost paternal tone, referring to a processing unit the size of a small refrigerator. He described one such engineer, a man named Arthur. Arthur had been with the project since its inception. His hands, though calloused from years of delicate soldering and component manipulation, moved with an almost surgical precision. He knew the idiosyncrasies of each machine, the particular whine of a specific fan that might indicate a bearing nearing its end, of the subtle shift in the blinking pattern of an indicator light that signaled a successful data transfer or a nascent error. He could read the machines like an ancient text, deciphering their silent communications. He would often be found sitting on a low stool, his gaze fixed on a blinking panel, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on a nearby workbench. His world shrunk to the confines of that small illuminated space. The hum of the fans, the click of relays, the whir of tape drives. These were the sounds that formed the soundtrack to his concentration. He wasn't bored, not in the slightest. Boredom was a concept alien to this environment. There was always something to observe, something to refine, something to ensure was operating at its peak potential. It was a form of meditative engagement, a deep dive into the intricate dance of logic gates and electrical currents. "And the magnetic tape," the narrator continued, a touch of wonder in his voice. Gee, yeah, the magnetic tape. Not the flimsy cassettes of later years, but substantial reels, often 12 inches in diameter, holding vast quantities of information. Loading a reel was a ritual. The engineer would approach the tape drive, a polished metal arm extending like a welcoming hand. With a practiced motion, the tape would be threaded through guides, secured to a take-up reel, and then, with a soft whir, the drive would engage. The reel would begin to spin, slowly at first, then gathering momentum, a silent testament to the unseen data flowing within. These engineers, he emphasized, were the guardians of this digital sanctuary. They understood that their work, though often invisible to the outside world, was foundational. They were building the future, one carefully calibrated circuit at a time, and they did it with a quiet dedication, fueled by a shared passion for the elegant complexity of these early computing machines. Their late nights weren't a hardship. They were an opportunity to be present in the heart of the humming, beige labyrinth. Chapter 3. The Whispers of Data. The very air in the basement seemed thick with the silent passage of data. It wasn't a tangible thing, of course, but you could almost feel it, a subtle vibration in the atmosphere, a restless energy that emanated from the blinking lights and spinning reels. This was the essence of the mainframe, the reason for its existence, the processing and storage of information. "Imagine," the narrator began, his voice hushed. "Millions of bits of information are represented by electrical impulses, zipping through intricate circuits, ones and zeros, forming patterns, executing instructions. It was a language spoken at the speed of light, a silent conversation happening within the beige cabinets. The blinking lights on the control panels weren't just decorative. They were the visible manifestations of this internal dialogue. A steady green light might signify a completed task, a blinking amber one, a query, a flashing red, on a moment requiring Arthur's gentle intervention. He painted a picture of the data flow. The magnetic tape reels were the archives, the long-term memory. They would be loaded and unloaded with a rhythmic regularity, each one a treasure trove of calculations, scientific data, or perhaps even early attempts at inventory management for some vast corporation. The tape drives themselves were marvels of mechanical precision, their read/write heads hovering mere microns above the magnetic surface. capturing and releasing the ephemeral whispers of data. Consider the sheer volume, he mused. A single reel of tape, by today's standards, held a pittance of information. But in the 1960s, it was immense. It represented weeks, months, perhaps even years of accumulated knowledge. And to access it, to retrieve a specific piece of data, required a deliberate, almost ceremonial act. An engineer would input a command, and the tape would begin to wind, the reel spinning faster and faster. He's searching through the silent, ordered rows of magnetic particles for the precise location of the requested information. There was a certain romance to it, wasn't there? He added, a soft smile in his voice. This invisible ballet of information. The engineers, with their knowledge of algorithms and data structures, were the choreographers guiding the unseen dancers. They weren't just operating machines, they were orchestrating symphonies of logic. Each successful computation, each stored piece of data, was a note in a grand, unfolding composition. And the silence, he concluded, was deceptive. Beneath the steady hum, within the cool, beige confines, a universe of information was being born, processed, and preserved. The whispers of data were everywhere, a constant unseen current flowing through the veins of the mainframe, a testament to the growing power of organized thought made manifest in silicon and steel. Chapter 4. The Midnight Rituals. As the hours grew later and the world above slumbered, the basement took on a different character. It wasn't that the machines changed or the engineers suddenly became more frantic. Rather, the absence of external noise amplified the internal symphony of the computers. This was the time for the deeper, more intensive tasks, the calculations that required uninterrupted processing power. Midnight, the narrator began, his voice a low, comforting rumble. Shem was often the chosen hour. The phone calls dwindled to a trickle, the interoffice memos ceased their rustling, and the basement became an even more focused sanctuary. This was when the real number crunching happened. Complex simulations, astronomical calculations, vast data analyses, the kinds of tasks that could tie up a mainframe for hours on end. He described the scene. Arthur might be there, or perhaps Eleanor, another of the quiet luminaries of the computing floor. They'd be sipping from thermoses of lukewarm coffee, the occasional shared glance a form of communication more efficient than words. The main task for the night would be loaded, a carefully prepared deck of punch cards or a reel of magnetic tape containing the program and its data. The operator would initiate the process, and then patience. Patience was a virtue honed in this environment. The machines worked at their own pace. And the engineers could only ensure that everything was set up correctly, that the power supply was stable, that the cooling systems were functioning optimally. Then they would watch. They would observe the blinking lights, listen to the subtle shifts in the hum, and wait. It was a vigil of sorts, a quiet guardianship over the unfolding digital process. Sometimes, he continued, a hint of a smile in his voice, there were moments of quiet amusement. A particularly complex calculation might produce an unexpected intermediate result, causing a cascade of warning lights that would require a minor adjustment. Arthur might chuckle softly, "Ah, the old girl's thinking outside the box tonight." Or Eleanor might quietly murmur, "Such a drama queen," as a process stumbled momentarily before righting itself. These weren't moments of panic, but rather small, and human acknowledgments of the inherent unpredictability that even the most logical of systems could sometimes exhibit. The monotony to an outsider might have seemed profound, the same sounds, the same sights, hour after hour. But for those who understood, it was a rich tapestry of subtle variations. The gentle rhythm of the tape reels, the pulsating glow of the indicator lamps, the steady exhalation of cool air. All these elements contributed to a sense of purpose, a quiet dedication to the task at hand. And as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the world outside, these midnight rituals would draw to a close, the machines having faithfully executed their nightly duties, leaving behind a residue of processed data and a lingering, comforting hum. Chapter 5. The Scent of Ozone and Progress. The distinctive scent of the basement wasn't just a byproduct of the cooling systems. It was also a subtle olfactory signature of the technology itself. Ozone, a sharp, clean scent, was often present in the vicinity of electrical equipment, particularly older vacuum tube technology. "That smell," the narrator explained, his voice soft and reflective. The faint tang of ozone. It was the scent of electricity hard at work. Not the acrid smell of burning wires, mind you, but a clean, almost bracing aroma that spoke of high voltages and the ceaseless movement of electrons. Mixed with the warmed plastic and the faint metallic tang of the machinery, it created a unique perfume, the olfactory signature of the early computing era. He invited the listener to imagine it. Picture Arthur, perhaps, hunched over a console, the air around him alive with that subtle, ozone-tinged breeze. He might not consciously notice it, his senses attuned to the more immediate concerns of blinking lights and humming relays. But to a visitor or to someone stepping away from the immediate vicinity of a particularly active unit, that scent would be unmistakable. It was the smell of potential, the smell of raw power being carefully harnessed. It mingled, too, with the scent of the engineers themselves, he mused. A faint trace of pipe tobacco from a jacket pocket, the subtle aroma of strong coffee from a thermos, the clean scent of laundry detergent from a freshly pressed shirt. These human elements, superimposed on the technological backdrop, created a surprisingly nuanced atmosphere. It wasn't sterile, despite the efforts to maintain a controlled environment. It was lived in, a space where dedicated individuals spent countless hours in pursuit of a common goal. And the progress, he emphasized, that scent was also the smell of progress. It was the aroma of innovation, of a new era dawning. These machines, with their whirring tapes and blinking lights, were pushing the boundaries of what was possible. They were calculating the trajectories of rockets, analyzing complex scientific data, and laying the groundwork for the digital revolution. The ozone was the ephemeral breath of that transformation, a constant reminder of the energy being expended in its creation. So, when you think of those beige basements, the narrator concluded, his voice a gentle invitation to recall. Don't just think of the sounds or the sights. Try to conjure the scent, that unique blend of ozone, warmed plastic, and quiet dedication. It was the subtle, often overlooked, sensory backdrop to a pivotal moment in human history, the quiet hum of progress filling the cool, twilight air. Chapter 6. The Symphony of the Fans. While the blinking lights and spinning tape reels often captured the attention, it was the constant, pervasive hum of the cooling systems that formed the true sonic bedrock of the mainframe environment. This was not a jarring noise, but a deep, resonant drone that, over time, became a form of white noise, a comforting presence. "The fans," the narrator began, his voice adopting a slightly more rhythmic cadence. "They were the lungs of the beast, large, powerful, and relentless. They drew in the cooler ambient air from the vents, circulated it through the densely packed racks of electronics, and expelled the warmed air, carrying with it the subtle scent of ozone and charged components. And they did it all with a consistent, unwavering drone." He elaborated on the sonic landscape. Imagine a choir of 100 voices, all singing the same low, sustained note. That was the sound of the fans. It wasn't a single, monotonous pitch, however. Each fan, with its own unique motor and blade design, contributed its own subtle variation. There might be a slightly higher-pitched whine from one, a deeper thrum from another, a faint, rhythmic flutter from a third. These individual voices, blended together, created a complex, layered soundscape. For the engineers, he explained, this symphony of fans was more than just background noise. It was a diagnostic tool, a sudden change in pitch, a new rattle, a concerning silence. These were all indicators that something might be amiss. Arthur could often identify a failing bearing in a fan from 50 yards away, his ears trained to the subtle deviations from the norm. He'd nod, not with alarm, but with a quiet resolve, and make a mental note to investigate during his next rounds. And for those who worked there regularly, the narrator continued, the hum became strangely soothing. It was the sound of order, of systems functioning as intended. It was a constant reminder of the immense power being contained and controlled within those beige cabinets. When the machines were actively processing, the hum might deepen, a subtle shift in its resonant frequency, as if the machines were exerting more effort. When idle, it might soften slightly, a gentle sigh of respite. It was the sound of continuity, he mused, the sound of technology performing its duty, day in and day out, through the quiet hours of the night, through the busy days. It was a lullaby for the digital age, a constant comforting presence that permeated every corner of the basement. And as you drifted into sleep, that gentle, pervasive hum would be the last thing you heard, a soft, unwavering reminder that even in the deepest hours of the night, the work of computation continued, a silent, tireless endeavor. Chapter 7. The Punch Card Ballet. Before the era of keyboards and direct data entry, the primary way to communicate with these early mainframes was through punch cards. These small, stiff pieces of cardboard, meticulously perforated with patterns of holes, were the physical manifestation of code and data. "Ah, the punch cards," the narrator began, a hint of fond nostalgia in his voice. They were the humble messengers, the carriers of instructions and information. Each card, a rigid rectangle, was a testament to precision. A misplaced hole, a torn corner, and the entire message could be garbled, the meticulously crafted logic rendered meaningless. He described the process of their creation. Teams of operators, often women with nimble fingers and exceptional attention to detail, would sit at key punch machines. Imagine a typewriter, but instead of striking keys to imprint ink on paper, each keystroke punched a specific hole, or combination of holes, into the card. So the rhythmic clatter of these machines would sometimes echo faintly from an adjacent room, a percussive counterpoint to the steady hum of the mainframes. Once punched, he continued, the cards would be carefully organized into decks, often bound together with rubber bands. A single program could consist of hundreds, even thousands, of these cards, each one representing a specific instruction or piece of data. Loading a program involved feeding this deck into a card reader, a mechanical maw that would ingest the cards one by one, its sensors reading the patterns of holes and translating them into electrical signals. The reading process itself, the narrator explained, was a fascinating spectacle. The card reader would hum and whir, its internal mechanisms feeding the cards through at a steady pace. Indicator lights would flash, signifying the successful reading of each card. If an error occurred, a card upside down, on a double punch, the machine would often halt, its operator, usually one of the engineers, needing to diagnose the problem. This would involve carefully examining the offending card, perhaps even repunching it, before reinitiating the process. It was a slow, deliberate form of interaction, he mused, a stark contrast to the instantaneity we know today. But there was a certain satisfaction in it. The physical act of creating the program, of organizing the data, of feeding the cards into the machine. It fostered a deep understanding of the process. You could almost feel the logic unfolding as the cards were read, each hole a tiny key unlocking a new stage of computation. And when a large batch job was complete, he concluded, the output would often be printed, a continuous stream of paper filled with numbers, text, or diagnostic messages. This printout, too, was a physical artifact, a tangible result of the invisible ballet of electrons and logic gates. The punch cards, though eventually superseded, were the silent, diligent workhorses that powered the early dreams of computation, their rhythmic clicking a forgotten melody in the grand symphony of the mainframe. Chapter 8. The Unblinking Eyes. The control panels of the mainframe computers were a mesmerizing sight, especially in the dim, consistent lighting of the basement. Arrays of lights, switches, and dials, each with its specific purpose, formed a complex, ever-changing display. "The lights," the narrator began, his voice taking on a slightly more descriptive quality. "They were the eyes of the machines, tiny incandescent bulbs, arranged in neat rows and grids, blinking, glowing, and pulsing with an internal rhythm. Red, amber, green, sometimes even blue, each color signifying a different state, a different message from the depths of the circuitry." He invited the listener to visualize this. Imagine a vast panel stretching several feet across. Thousands of these tiny lights, some steady, some flickering like distant stars, others blinking with an urgent cadence. They weren't randomly scattered, they were meticulously organized, indicating the status of memory banks, of the activity of processing units, the flow of data through various channels. To the uninitiated, it was a chaotic, bewildering spectacle. But to Arthur or Eleanor, it was a map, a real-time representation of the computer's internal workings. There were also the switches, he continued, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of toggle switches, levers, and rotary dials. These were the controls, the means by which the engineers could interact with the machine, initiate processes, halt operations, or manually input commands. Flipping a switch wasn't a trivial action, it was a deliberate intervention, a command issued to the silicon heart of the computer. And the meters, the narrator added, analog dials with sweeping needles, indicating voltage levels, processing load, or tape drive speed. These provided a more continuous, less binary form of information, allowing the engineers to gauge the overall health and performance of the system. A needle wavering slightly outside its normal range could be an early warning, a subtle signal of an impending issue. This constant silent display, he mused, was the visual equivalent of the background hum. It was the ever-present evidence of the machine's activity. Even when seemingly idle, the lights would pulse and blink, a low-level chatter indicating that the systems were still active, still ready. It created an atmosphere of perpetual vigilance, a sense that these machines were always awake, always aware, their unblinking eyes observing the silent flow of data. It was a unique form of communication, he concluded, a language of light and position understood by a select few. And in the quiet solitude of the basement, surrounded by the steady glow of these indicators, the engineers were not just technicians. They were interpreters, deciphering the silent, luminous pronouncements of the digital age, ensuring that the unblinking eyes remained focused and true. Chapter 9. The Solitude of the Task. The nature of the work in the mainframe basement fostered a peculiar kind of solitude. It wasn't the loneliness of being unwanted, but the deep, focused solitude that comes from being utterly engrossed in a complex, individual task. The work itself, the narrator began, his voice soft and contemplative, was often solitary. While teams of engineers and operators might be present, their tasks were highly individualized. Arthur might be meticulously tracing a circuit on a logic board, while Eleanor was carefully preparing a new data tape, and another engineer was monitoring the output of a lengthy print job. Conversations were infrequent, brief, and usually task-oriented. He described the feeling. This wasn't a bustling office environment. There were no water cooler chats, no impromptu brainstorming sessions. The primary focus was on the machine, on the task at hand, and the vastness of the basement. with its rows of imposing cabinets, could contribute to a sense of personal isolation, even when others were nearby. Each engineer was, in a way, enclosed within their own sphere of concentration, their own dialogue with the technology. But this solitude, he emphasized, was not necessarily a negative thing. For many, it was a welcome respite from the noise and distractions of the outside world. It allowed for a level of deep focus, an immersion in the intricate details of computing that was essential for the work. When you are dealing with millions of electrical pulses, with the potential for subtle errors to cascade into significant problems, concentration is paramount. There was a shared understanding among those who worked there, the narrator continued, a silent acknowledgement of the demands of the task. They respected each other's need for quiet, for uninterrupted thought. A brief nod, a shared glance over a complex readout. These were the gestures of camaraderie in this unique environment. They were a team, yes, but a team composed of individuals deeply engaged in their own solitary quests for accuracy and efficiency. And during the late hours, he mused, when the activities of the upper floors had ceased, this sense of solitude could deepen. The basement, with its persistent hum and steady glow, became an even more intimate space, shared only by the engineers and the machines. It was a time for quiet reflection, for a deep connection with the intricate workings of the technology. This was not the solitude of abandonment, but the chosen solitude of deep engagement, a peaceful immersion in the silent, tireless world of computation. Chapter 10. The Human Touch in the Machine. Despite the cold, logical nature of computers, the human element was inextricably woven into their operation and maintenance. It was the engineers, with their ingenuity, patience, and even their occasional foibles, who breathed life into the silicon and steel. "You might see a machine," the narrator began, his voice imbued with a gentle warmth. A hulking beige cabinet filled with complex electronics. On the surface, it was pure logic, pure electricity. But beneath that facade, there was always the human touch. The careful soldering of a circuit board, the precise threading of magnetic tape, the thoughtful input of a command. These were all acts of human intention. He offered an example. Arthur, for instance, had a particular way of organizing his tools, his screwdrivers, his pliers, his soldering iron, all arranged in a specific order on his workbench. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it spoke of his meticulous nature, and his need for order that extended even to the physical objects he used. And this meticulousness was directly reflected in the reliability of the machines he tended. Then there were the small, almost imperceptible adaptations, he continued. Perhaps a piece of tape carefully placed over a particularly bright, distracting indicator light, or a small handwritten label added to a less than obvious switch. These weren't official modifications, but practical, and on-the-fly solutions born from hours of experience. They were the quiet annotations of the human operator, making the machine more amenable to its caretakers. And the problem-solving, the narrator mused. When a machine faltered, it wasn't a simple matter of consulting a manual and replacing a part. It often required a detective's intuition, a process of elimination, of hypothesis and testing. The engineers would trace the flow of electricity, consult schematics that were themselves works of intricate art, and make educated guesses. There was a certain artistry to it, a blend of scientific knowledge and practical experience. Sometimes, he added, a soft chuckle in his voice, there were even moments of almost anthropomorphic affection. A programmer might refer to the computer as she, or express frustration with its stubbornness. While the machines were, of course, inanimate, the prolonged and intense interaction fostered a peculiar kind of relationship. The engineers, in a sense, came to know these machines intimately, their quirks and their strengths. So, while the hum and the blinking lights spoke of automated processes, he concluded, it was the human touch that truly animated the mainframe. It was the dedication, the ingenuity, and the quiet perseverance of the engineers that kept these complex systems running, as transforming raw electricity and logic into the very foundations of the digital future. The machines were the instruments, but the engineers were the conductors, orchestrating the symphony of computation. Chapter 11. The Gentle Rhythm of the Reels. The magnetic tape drives were perhaps the most visually dynamic components of the mainframe environment, their spinning reels a constant hypnotic motion. This mechanical ballet was central to the storage and retrieval of vast amounts of data. The reels of tape, the narrator began, his voice adopting a slow, deliberate pace. They were the physical embodiment of digital information, not the instantaneous access of solid-state drives, but a physical medium that required mechanical interaction, and the drives themselves, with their large gleaming reels, were captivating to watch. He described the process. A reel, perhaps a foot in diameter, filled with thin, dark magnetic tape, would be mounted onto a spindle. A length of tape would be carefully fed through a series of guides, looped around a capstan, and then attached to a take-up reel. With a soft whir, the drive would engage. The lower reel would begin to spin, feeding tape upwards, while the upper reel would rotate more slowly, collecting the processed tape. It was a dance of motion, he continued. The speed of the rotation varied depending on whether the computer was reading data, writing data, or simply positioning the tape. Sometimes the reels would spin rapidly, a blur of motion indicating a fast search for a specific data block. At other times, they would turn slowly and deliberately, a gentle rotation as data was being meticulously written or read. This rhythmic spinning, the narrator mused, created a unique visual and auditory experience. The steady whirring sound, the graceful arc of the tape moving between the reels, the way the light caught the polished metal of the drive mechanisms, it was all part of the hypnotic allure of the mainframe room. It was a constant visible reminder of the work being done, the unseen flow of information being meticulously managed. And the sheer volume of data, he added, represented by those winding ribbons of plastic and magnetic oxide. Each reel could hold millions of characters, the accumulated results of hours, days, or even weeks of computation. Loading and unloading these reels, threading the tape, ensuring proper tension, these were tasks that required a steady hand and a practiced eye. They were rituals that connected the operator directly to the data. So, as you listen to the pervasive hum, the narrator concluded, try to picture the gentle, rhythmic spinning of those tape reels. The hypnotic motion of the tape, winding and unwinding, a silent testament to the vast oceans of information being stored, processed, and preserved. It was a visual lullaby, a kinetic representation of the tireless work of the mainframe, a constant, a calming presence in the beige-lit twilight of the basement. Chapter 12. The Quiet Architects of the Future. The individuals who worked in these basement laboratories were, in many ways, the unsung heroes of the technological revolution. Their work, often invisible to the public eye, laid the essential groundwork for the digital world we inhabit today. They were not seeking fame or fortune, the narrator began, his voice tinged with a quiet reverence. Their reward was often the intrinsic satisfaction of solving a complex problem, of seeing a program run successfully, of contributing to a project that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They were, in essence, the quiet architects of the future. He painted a picture of their dedication. Imagine the late nights, the weekends spent in the cool, hum-filled basement, meticulously debugging code, calibrating equipment, or simply observing the steady operation of the machines. This was not glamorous work. It required immense patience, a deep understanding of complex systems, and an unwavering commitment to accuracy. Think of the pioneers, he continued, the engineers and scientists who were wrestling with these nascent technologies. They were charting unknown territory, developing the fundamental principles of computing that would shape decades to come. Their failures were as instructive as their successes, each setback a lesson learned, each breakthrough a small victory that paved the way for larger advancements. The mainframe computers themselves, the narrator mused, were the tools of their trade, but they were also something more. They were the extensions of their intellect, the physical manifestations of their ideas. The algorithms they designed, the data they processed, the simulations they ran, all of it was a testament to human ingenuity, amplified by the power of these machines. And their legacy, he concluded, on his voice soft and reflective, is all around us. The seamless digital interactions we take for granted today, the vast networks of information, the powerful personal computers and smartphones, all of it traces its lineage back to those early days, to those quiet laboratories and the dedicated individuals who patiently coaxed progress from humming machines and blinking lights. They were the quiet architects, and their foundations, though often unseen, are remarkably strong. Chapter 13. The Logic of Monotony. The steady, repetitive nature of mainframe operations might seem, to an outsider, like an embrace of monotony. However, within the context of early computing, this very rhythm was a sign of reliability and efficiency. There is a certain comfort, you see, the narrator explained, his voice calm and measured, in predictability, in the steady, unwavering operation of a complex system. The mainframe computers of the 1960s, on with their deliberate processes and predictable cycles, offered just that. He elaborated on the concept. Each task, whether it was processing a payroll, running a scientific simulation, or updating an inventory, followed a defined sequence. The card reader would ingest the program, the CPU would execute the instructions, the data would be read from or written to magnetic tape, and the results would be printed. This was not a chaotic, unpredictable process, but a structured, logical flow. The engineers who maintained these systems, he continued, came to understand and appreciate this rhythm. The steady hum of the fans, the regular blinking of the indicator lights, the predictable whirring of the tape drives. These were not signs of boredom, but indicators of a system functioning as intended. A deviation from this expected pattern was a signal that something required attention. This monotony, the narrator mused, was, in fact, a form of reassurance. It meant that the complex calculations were proceeding without error, that the vast amounts of data were being handled reliably. It allowed the engineers to focus on higher-level tasks, on ensuring the integrity of the system, rather than constantly reacting to unexpected failures. It was the logic of reliability, built into the very fabric of the machine's operation. And for the machines themselves, he concluded, this steady, repetitive work was their purpose. They were built to perform these tasks, to process information tirelessly, day in and day out. The gentle, predictable rhythm of their operation was not a sign of limitation, but a testament to their design, a quiet celebration of the power of consistent, logical execution. It was a monotonous hum, perhaps, but it was the sound of progress, reliably unfolding in the cool, beige heart of the basement. Chapter 14. Echoes in the Quiet. Even in the hushed, controlled environment of the mainframe basement, subtle echoes of the outside world could sometimes intrude, creating fleeting moments of connection between the subterranean realm and the bustling world above. While the basement was a sanctuary, the narrator began, his voice taking on a more reflective tone. It was not entirely divorced from the world beyond its concrete walls. Occasionally, sounds from the floors above would filter down, muted and distorted, like distant memories. He offered examples. Perhaps the muffled sound of footsteps, heavier and more hurried than those of the basement engineers, would briefly echo down the stairwell. or the faint, almost imperceptible vibration of a truck passing outside, a subtle tremor felt through the floor. Sometimes, on a particularly still evening, the distant wail of a siren might drift down, a momentary reminder of the city's pulse. These sounds, he continued, were like brief intrusions of the ephemeral into the enduring. The machines, after all, were designed for long-term operation, for consistent performance. The tasks they undertook often spanned hours, days, even weeks. They were built for persistence, for a steady rhythm that transcended the fleeting events of the day. And the engineers, the narrator mused, while deeply focused on their work, were not entirely immune to these echoes. A distant laugh, a sudden burst of music from an upper office, these moments might momentarily break their concentration, a brief involuntary acknowledgement of the human world just beyond their immediate sphere. But the hum of the machines, the blinking lights, the task at hand, would invariably draw their focus back. These subtle echoes, he concluded, served to underscore the unique nature of the basement environment. It was a space dedicated to a specific, vital purpose, operating on a different temporal plane from the world above. The quiet persistence of the computers, the steady rhythm of their operation, stood in gentle contrast to the more transient sounds and activities of everyday life. And as the night wore on, these echoes would fade, leaving only the comforting, consistent hum of the machines, a sound that spoke of continuity and the silent, tireless work of computation. Chapter 15. The Enduring Hum. As the narrative draws to a close, the essence of this world, the gentle hum, the beige stillness, the quiet dedication, lingers, a soft echo in the listener's mind. And so the night would deepen, the narrator began, his voice now a mere whisper, and the work would continue. The mainframe computers, those vast beige titans, would keep their silent vigil, their internal processes humming along with a steady, unwavering rhythm. The magnetic tape reels would spin, the indicator lights would blink their silent messages, and the cool, ozone-tinged air would circulate, maintaining the delicate balance required for computation. He reflected on the atmosphere. It was a world of quiet purpose, of meticulous attention to detail, of a profound, almost meditative engagement with technology. The engineers, like Arthur and Eleanor, were the custodians of this digital heart, their presence a subtle counterpoint to the tireless operation of the machines. They moved with a practiced grace, their actions guided by years of experience and a deep understanding of the systems they tended. The sounds, he continued, the pervasive hum of the fans, the soft whirring of the tape drives, the occasional click of a relay. These formed a unique symphony, a lullaby for the dawning digital age. It was a soundscape that spoke of reliability, of consistency, of the relentless march of progress, orchestrated in the quiet solitude of a basement laboratory. And though the technology has evolved, the narrator mused, his voice fading, though the sleek devices of today have long since replaced these hulking machines, the spirit of that era, the dedication to building the future through careful, patient work, endures. The gentle hum of those early mainframes, a sound that once filled the cool, beige-lit basements, it serves as a quiet reminder of the foundations upon which our modern digital world was built. So, as you drift off to sleep, he concluded, his voice barely audible, a final soft whisper, imagine that enduring hum, the steady, comforting drone of machines working through the night, a testament to human ingenuity and the quiet power of computation. Let it lull you into a peaceful slumber, carrying with it the echoes of a time when the future was being quietly computed. One blink of a light, one spin of a reel at a time, a gentle, persistent hum, fading into the quiet dark.